Femi was 8 years old the first time he truly understood what silence meant. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of survival. His father, Baba Femi, was not a bad man by the world's definition. He never raised his hand, but his words had weight and volume. Always volume. His mother, Mama Femi, was the opposite. Soft, gentle. She absorbed everything quietly, like cloth soaking water, until one day there was nothing left to absorb. He told himself quietly, because even his thoughts had learned to be quiet. I will never be like my father. I will never raise my voice. I will never make someone feel small with my words. And he kept that vow for the rest of his life. By secondary school, Femi had become known as the quiet one. Not shy, not sad, just still, like deep water. His teachers respected it. His classmates misread it. But Femi? He thought it was strength. He had no idea it would one day cost him everything.
Femi Adeyemi was 32 years old, an account manager at a big firm in Lagos, and by every visible measure, a successful, composed man. He spoke when necessary. He laughed when something was genuinely funny. He never performed emotions he did not feel. Elizabeth Okafor, Lizzy, walked into that restaurant on a Thursday evening like she owned the air around her. Loud laugh, warm energy. The kind of woman who made strangers feel like old friends within minutes. She was meeting her friend Sandra for dinner. Sandra, her best friend since university, married, vibrant, and always running late, and always worth the wait. Sandra was late, as usual. She sat at the wrong table. She apologized. He nodded. She laughed at herself. He almost smiled. She offered a handshake. He took it. Firm, brief, warm. And something about his stillness in the middle of all her energy made her pause. Most men she knew talked too much, boasted, tried to impress. This one simply existed, calmly, completely. It was magnetic. 3 weeks later, they had their first official date. Lizzy talked. Femi listened. Really listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually absorbing every word. She had never felt so heard in her life. And Femi? He felt safe. For the first time, someone filled the silence for him. He did not have to perform. He did not have to speak. He could just be. She did not yet understand the difference between a man who listens and a man who simply does not speak. 2 years later, they were married, and in the beginning, the silence was beautiful. The apartment was clean. The bills were paid. There was food on the table, and clothes in the wardrobe. By every practical standard, Femi Adeyemi was a good husband. But Lizzy was starving. It started small. Conversations that went nowhere. Questions that hit walls. Nights that ended in separate silences, hers loud and aching, his calm and unaware. She thought it would pass, that maybe marriage was just like this at first. But weeks turned into months, and the quiet she once found peaceful began to feel like suffocation. One evening, after another wordless dinner, she tried again. "Femi, how was your day?" "Fine." "Femi, are you okay?" "Yes." "Femi, do you love me?" Silence. Femi looked at her across the table. He saw the question in her eyes. He felt something. Not quite discomfort, not quite confusion, just a quiet sense that she wanted something from him he didn't know how to give. Words had always felt dangerous to him. His father's words had weight. His mother had drowned in them. So Femi had learned to live without them. And in his silence, he felt safe. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't see, was that his safety was her prison. He was not ignoring her. That was the painful part. In his mind, he was simply being present, being calm, being everything his father was not. He sat with her, he provided for her, he never raised his voice or made her feel small. Wasn't that enough? What he could not see, what he had never been taught to see, was that presence without words is just a body in a room. Lizzy didn't want grand gestures. She didn't need flowers or poetry or declarations. She wanted to know what he was thinking when he stared out the window for 20 minutes without speaking. She wanted to know what he was feeling when she reached for his hand and he held it, but didn't hold her eyes. She wanted to know whether their life together meant something to him beyond a routine, beyond duty, beyond the vow he made on their wedding day. She wanted to be let in. But Femi's door had been locked since he was 8 years old, and he had long since lost the key. Every Friday, without fail, Femi, Tunde, Emeka, and Segun, 4 friends since university, different men, same table, same bar. And in the corner of that bar, always, an old man, quiet, nursing the same drink, never joining, always present. Nobody knew his name. Nobody asked. Tunde was speaking, as Tunde always was. "My guy, Femi, I'm telling you. Sandra and Lizzy are tight. Sandra has been telling her things, marriage things. You need to start opening up to your wife before she starts opening up to someone else." Emeka laughed. "Tunde, leave the man alone. Not every marriage needs plenty talk. As long as there is no shouting, no beating, the marriage is fine." Segun shook his head slowly. That's the problem with us men. We think no violence means no problem, but emotional absence is its own kind of damage. Silence fell on the table. Even Femi looked up. Femi said nothing, finished his drink, and changed the subject. But Segun's words followed him home. Sat in the passenger seat, walked into the apartment, and stood beside the bed as he lay down next to his sleeping wife. Sandra had been hiding it for 8 months. It started small. A raised voice, a slammed door, an apology with flowers. She believed him. Then the shoves became slaps. The slaps became fists. The flowers became lies. The raised fists, the broken plates, the apologies that came with flowers, and then fists again. Tunde, the same man who sat at that bar table telling Femi to open up to his wife, was behind closed doors a very different man. Sandra told Lizzy everything one afternoon. The screaming, the violence, the terror of a loud man. And sitting there, listening, Lizzy felt something she didn't expect. Guilt. Because Femi had never raised his hand, never shouted, never broken anything. So why did she feel just as alone? Sandra's husband left scars you could see. Femi's silence left scars you couldn't explain. And somehow that made Lizzy feel like she had no right to be hurting. But pain does not require permission, and loneliness does not require an empty house. It didn't start with shouting. It started with a question. Femi, do you even want to be in this marriage? He looked at her, said nothing. And something in Lizzy, something she had been carefully holding together for 3 years, finally let go. She told him everything. Every silent dinner, every unanswered question, every night she lay awake wondering if she was invisible. Every time she needed a partner and got a roommate, every morning she woke up lonelier than the day before. She cried, she shook, she begged him to just say something, anything. But Femi hardly speaks. He had so much to say and no idea how to say it. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the floor, and walked to the bedroom. He didn't slam the door. He never did. He simply closed it. Quietly. Some doors, when closed quietly enough times, stop opening altogether. Femi read the document 3 times, then a 4th. The words were clear, petition for dissolution of marriage, but his mind refused to process them. He had provided, he had been faithful, he had never raised his voice. He had never, not once, been his father. So why? He didn't call his friends. He went to the bar alone. An hour passed, maybe 2. Femi didn't move, didn't drink,
just sat with the weight of something he couldn't name. Until he heard the stool beside him pull back. The old man didn't introduce himself, didn't ask questions, just sat. And somehow, for the first time in perhaps his entire adult life, Femi began to talk. She is leaving me, and I do not understand why. I gave her everything I had. The old man was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he turned and looked at Femi. Did you give her yourself? The old man spoke slowly, like a man who had earned every word. I was like you once. I thought silence was dignity. I thought providing was loving. I thought if I kept my pain inside, I was protecting everyone around me. Femi listened, really listened, the way he had listened to Lizzy on their very first date, except this time, the words were landing somewhere deep, somewhere he had kept locked for a very long time. My wife left me too. Not to another man, not because of violence. She left because she said living with me was like living in an empty house with the lights on. Everything looked fine from the outside, but inside, nothing warm. Silence is not strength, my son. Silence can be the loudest form of abandonment. Your father was loud and damaging, but you chose the opposite extreme, and the opposite extreme carries its own damage. Love is not the absence of your father's behavior. Love is presence, real presence, words, vulnerability, letting someone in, even when it terrifies you. Femi said nothing, but this time the silence was different. This time it was not a wall. It was a man finally hearing something he had spent 30 years running from. Lizzy was not celebrating. There was no victory in filing those papers. Only exhaustion and grief. Grief for a love that should have been enough and wasn't. And Femi, for the first time, was not being still because he was strong. He was being still because he was finally, painfully, beginning to understand the difference between silence as protection and silence as prison. This is not a story about a bad man. This is a story about a wounded boy who grew into a man who never learned to bleed out loud. And the woman who loved him and could not survive the silence. What happens next? That is not for me to say. Some stories do not end. They simply pause and wait for the people inside them to choose.